Imagine a world where the most beloved sports hero in the United States suddenly becomes the prime suspect in a brutal double homicide. It was a transformation that seemed impossible to comprehend for millions of Americans who had grown up watching Orenthal James Simpson sprint across football fields and charm audiences in television commercials. The year was 1994, and the cultural landscape was about to shift permanently under the weight of a single legal proceeding. This was not merely a court case, but a collision of celebrity culture and the grim reality of violent crime. The question on everyone's mind was whether a man who had everything could be capable of taking it all away from two innocent people. The silence of a Brentwood night was shattered not just by violence, but by the impending media storm that would engulf the entire nation for over a year. The events began late on the evening of June the 12th, 1994, in the affluent neighborhood of Brentwood, in Los Angeles, California. The air was cool, and the streets were quiet until a distressed dog led neighbors to a gruesome discovery at a condominium on South Bundy Drive. There on the tiled walkway lay the lifeless bodies of Nicole Brown Simpson and a young waiter named Ronald Goldman. The scene was chaotic and awash with evidence of a violent struggle that had taken place just moments before. Blood soaked the ground, and the silence of the night was replaced by the frantic activity of first responders. This was the home of the former wife of a football legend, and the brutality of the crime scene suggested a crime of immense passion and rage rather than a random robbery gone wrong. Detectives from the Los Angeles Police Department arrived at the scene to piece together the fragments of a nightmare. Among them were veteran investigators who had seen countless homicides, but few as high-profile or as bloody as this one. They found a single leather glove at the scene covered in blood, alongside a knit cap and bloody footprints leading away from the bodies. The investigation quickly turned its gaze toward the ex-husband of the female victim. Orenthal James Simpson lived just a short distance away at his Rockingham estate. The detectives decided to drive to his home to inform him of the tragedy and to secure the location. What they found there would become the subject of intense legal debate and public scrutiny for decades to come. Upon arriving at the Rockingham estate, the detectives noted a white Ford Bronco parked haphazardly on the street. Detective Mark Fuhrman famously scaled the wall of the property to gain entry, claiming he feared for the safety of the occupants inside. On the grounds of the estate, the investigators discovered what they believed was a crucial piece of evidence. It was a second leather glove stained with blood that appeared to match the one found at the crime scene on Bundy Drive. This discovery shifted the status of Orenthal James Simpson from a grieving ex-husband to the primary suspect in a double murder investigation. The police learned that Simpson had taken a late-night flight to Chicago just hours after the estimated time of the murders, adding another layer of suspicion to his movements. The Los Angeles Police Department moved quickly to issue a warrant for the arrest of Orenthal James Simpson. Lawyers for Simpson arranged for him to surrender to authorities, but as the deadline came and went, he was nowhere to be found. What followed was perhaps the most surreal moment in television history. On June the 17th, 95 million viewers tuned in to watch a white Ford Bronco drive slowly down the interstate highways of Los Angeles. Inside the vehicle was Simpson holding a gun to his head, while his friend Al Cowlings drove. It was a low-speed pursuit that captivated the world and interrupted the NBA Finals. Crowds gathered on overpasses cheering and holding signs, as if witnessing a parade rather than a fugitive run. The pursuit ended at the Rockingham estate, where Simpson eventually surrendered to police after lengthy negotiations. The image of the fallen idol being taken into custody marked the beginning of a legal saga that would be dubbed the trial of the century. The prosecution team was led by Deputy District Attorney Marcia Clark, a sharp and experienced prosecutor known for her tenacity. She was joined by Christopher Darden, who would play a pivotal role in the courtroom drama. They believed the physical evidence against Simpson was overwhelming. They had blood matches, hair samples, and the bloody gloves. To the prosecution, this was a clear case of domestic violence escalating to murder. They prepared to present a timeline that placed Simpson at the scene of the crime. Opposing the state was a legal team that would come to be known as the Dream Team. Simpson hired the most prominent defense attorneys in the United States, including Robert Shapiro and F. Lee Bailey and Alan Dershowitz, and eventually the charismatic Johnny Cochran, who took the lead. Their strategy was not just to defend their client, but to put the Los Angeles Police Department on trial. They aimed to dismantle the credibility of the investigation by highlighting mishandled evidence and suggesting racial bias among the officers involved. The defense knew that to win they had to create reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury. They focused intensely on the character of Detective Mark Fuhrman and the validity of the DNA evidence. The trial officially began in January 1995 under the supervision of Judge Lance Ito. The courtroom became a stage for a daily soap opera broadcast live to the world. Judge Ito made the controversial decision to allow television cameras in the courtroom, which fundamentally changed the atmosphere of the proceedings. Every gesture and every objection and every piece of testimony was analyzed by pundits and the public alike. The jury selection process had been arduous, resulting in a diverse panel that the defense felt would be sympathetic to their arguments regarding police misconduct. The prosecution felt confident in the hard science of their case, but they underestimated the power of the narrative being constructed by the defense team. Marcia Clark opened the case for the prosecution, with a focus on the domestic abuse that Nicole Brown Simpson had suffered during her marriage. The state presented harrowing recording of emergency calls made by Nicole in the years prior to her death. They painted a picture of Orenthal James Simpson not as a charming celebrity, but as a controlling and violent batterer. The prosecution argued that the murders were the final act of control by a man who could not accept that his former wife had moved on. They displayed the physical evidence linking Simpson to the crime scene, including blood drops found near the bodies that matched his genetic profile. It seemed like an open and shut case based on forensic science. The defense team countered with an opening statement that shocked the courtroom. Johnny Cochran told the jury that the evidence was contaminated and compromised and ultimately corrupted. He introduced the theory that the Los Angeles Police Department had rushed to judgment and planted evidence to frame a famous black man. The defense argued that the blood on the sock found in the bedroom of Simpson and the blood on the gate at Bundy Drive contained a preservative called EDTA, which suggested it had come from a test tube rather than a human body. This scientific rebuttal was complex, but it sowed the seeds of doubt. The defense was masterfully shifting the narrative from a murder trial to a civil rights crusade. One of the most critical witnesses for the prosecution was the limousine driver Alan Park. He testified that he had arrived at the Rockingham estate to take Simpson to the airport on the night of the murders. Park stated that he did not see the white Bronco when he first arrived, and that no one answered the intercom for some time. He then saw a shadowy figure enter the house, just moments before Simpson answered the door claiming he had overslept. This testimony created a significant gap in the timeline of the alibi provided by Simpson. However, the defense cross-examined Park rigorously, trying to find inconsistencies in his memory of the exact times and lighting conditions that night. The prosecution then moved to present the DNA evidence, which was a relatively new concept for the general public at the time. Expert witnesses spent weeks explaining the statistical improbability of the blood at the crime scene, belonging to anyone other than Orenthal James Simpson. They presented charts and graphs showing that the chance of a random match was 1 in billions. To the prosecutors, this was the smoking gun. However, the presentation was dry and highly technical. The jurors appeared bored and overwhelmed by the scientific jargon. The defense capitalized on this by bringing in their own experts to argue that the collection methods were sloppy and that the samples could have been cross-contaminated in the police laboratory. A turning point in the trial occurred when the prosecution made a risky decision regarding the bloody gloves. Christopher Darden asked Simpson to try on the gloves found at the crime scene and at his estate. In a moment that would be replayed endlessly on television, Simpson struggled to pull the leather gloves over his hands. He grimaced and held his hands up to the jury, showing that they appeared too small. This visual demonstration was a catastrophe for the prosecution. It allowed Johnny Cochran to coin the most famous phrase of the trial during his closing arguments. The image of Simpson struggling with the gloves became the defining symbol of the defense case that the evidence did not fit the suspect. The character of Detective Mark Fuhrman became the central target of the defense strategy. The defense unearthed tapes recorded by a screenwriter interviewing Fuhrman for a project. On these tapes, Fuhrman used vile racial slurs dozens of times and spoke about planting evidence and police brutality. This revelation was explosive. It directly contradicted his testimony under oath, where he claimed he had not used such language in the past decade. The judge ruled that the jury could hear excerpts of the tapes. The credibility of the man who found the key evidence was shattered. Fuhrman was forced to plead the Fifth Amendment when asked if he had planted or manufactured evidence in the case. As the trial dragged on for months, the sequestered jury began to show signs of strain. They were isolated from their families and the outside world, living in a hotel under constant guard. There were dismissals and replacements of jurors due to various infractions and personal issues. The atmosphere within the jury room was tense, reflecting the racial divisions that were playing out in the nation at large. The defense team worked tirelessly to ensure that the jurors understood the historical context of police misconduct in Los Angeles. They argued that a verdict of not guilty was a way to send a message to a corrupt police force. The prosecution struggled to regain momentum after the Fuhrman debacle. The closing arguments were a study in contrasting styles. Marcia Clark made a passionate plea for the victims, asking the jury to look past the smoke and mirrors and focus on the cold, hard facts of the murders. She reminded them of the blood trail and the hair and fibers and the timeline. She urged them to deliver justice for Nicole and Ronald. However, her words struggled to compete with the theatrical mastery of Johnny Cochran. Cochran wore a knit cap similar to the one found at the scene and rhymed his arguments for maximum impact. He hammered home the point about the gloves, saying, "If it does not fit, you must acquit." He painted Simpson as a victim of a racist conspiracy. After months of testimony and hundreds of witnesses, the case was finally handed over to the jury on October 2nd, 1995. Legal experts predicted that deliberations would take weeks given the mountain of evidence and the complexity of the legal instructions. To the shock of the entire world, the jury returned with a verdict in less than 4 hours. The speed of the decision suggested that the jurors had largely made up their minds long before the final arguments. The court clerk announced that the verdict would be read the following morning. The anticipation across the United States was palpable. Work stopped in offices, and schools paused classes, and crowds gathered in Times Square to watch the giant screen. On October 3rd, 1995 at 10 in the morning, the verdict was read. Orenthal James Simpson stood with his attorneys as the clerk announced that the jury found him not guilty on both counts of murder. Simpson exhaled deeply and smiled, while the families of the victims burst into tears of anguish. The reaction across the country was instantly polarized. In many black communities, there were cheers of jubilation viewed as a victory against a biased justice system. In many white communities, there was shock and outrage viewed as a miscarriage of justice. The split screen of reactions on television captured the deep racial divide that still existed in American society. Orenthal James Simpson walked out of court a free man, but his life had been irrevocably changed. He returned to his Rockingham estate, but the celebrity status he once enjoyed had curdled into infamy. He was no longer the lovable sports icon, but a pariah to a large portion of the public. Friends abandoned him, and country clubs revoked his memberships. The families of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman vowed to continue their pursuit of justice. They launched a civil lawsuit against Simpson for wrongful death. The burden of proof in a civil trial is lower than in a criminal trial, requiring only a preponderance of the evidence rather than proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The civil trial took place in 1997 in Santa Monica, California. This time, there were no television cameras in the courtroom, and Simpson was forced to testify. The plaintiff's lawyers grilled him on the inconsistencies in his story and his history of domestic violence. They presented photos of him wearing the same rare type of shoes that left bloody footprints at the crime scene, shoes he had previously denied owning. The civil jury found Simpson liable for the deaths of Nicole and Ronald. He was ordered to pay $33 million in damages. It was a legal victory for the families, but they saw very little of the money as Simpson claimed to be broke and moved to Florida to protect his pension. In the years following the trial, Simpson lived a strange existence. He engaged in behavior that seemed designed to provoke the public, including writing a book titled If I Did It, which hypothetically described how the murders would have been committed. The book caused a massive outcry, and the rights were eventually awarded to the Goldman family by a court. Simpson remained a fixture in the tabloids, often seen playing golf and partying, which further enraged those who believed he was a murderer walking free. His fall from grace was complete, yet he remained a subject of morbid fascination for the media and the public. Karma, or perhaps bad judgment, eventually caught up with Orenthal James Simpson in 2007. He led a group of men into a hotel room in Las Vegas to confront sports memorabilia dealers, claiming they had stolen his personal property. The confrontation was recorded and involved guns. Simpson was arrested and charged with armed robbery and kidnapping. In a twist of irony, the trial took place exactly 13 years to the day after his acquittal in the murder trial. This time, the jury had no sympathy. He was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 33 years in prison by a judge who insisted the sentence had nothing to do with the murders of 1994. Simpson spent 9 years in a Nevada prison before being granted parole in 2017. He emerged from prison, an elderly man, gray and moving slower, but still maintaining his innocence regarding the murders. He joined social media platforms where he posted videos giving his opinions on sports and politics, often ending with the phrase, "I am just saying." These posts were met with a mixture of support from fans and vitriol from critics who never forgot the events of 1994. He lived out his remaining years in Las Vegas, a shadow of the superstar he once was, constantly living under the cloud of the double homicide. The legacy of the O.J. Simpson trial extends far beyond the guilt or innocence of one man. It fundamentally changed the way the criminal justice system interacts with the media. It birthed the era of the 24-hour news cycle and reality television. It forced a painful national conversation about domestic violence, which had previously been treated as a private family matter. It also exposed the deep mistrust between the African American community and law enforcement, a wound that continues to fester decades later. The trial showed that truth in a courtroom is often a matter of perspective, and that money can indeed buy a different quality of defense. The forensic science introduced during the trial, specifically DNA profiling, became the gold standard for criminal investigations globally. The mistakes made by the Los Angeles Police Department in collecting and preserving evidence led to sweeping reforms in police procedures. Crime scene integrity became paramount, and the handling of biological evidence was standardized to prevent the kind of attacks launched by the Dream Team. In this way, the tragedy of the murders led to advancements that have helped solve countless other crimes and exonerate the innocent. It is a complicated legacy, born from a scene of horrific violence. The victims Nicole Simpson and Ronald Goldman are often overshadowed by the larger-than-life personality of the accused and the circus of the trial. Nicole was a mother of two who had tried to escape an abusive relationship. Ronald was a young man with dreams of opening his own restaurant who was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, trying to return a pair of sunglasses. Their lives were cut short in a brutal manner, and their families have spent decades keeping their memories alive. The Goldman and Brown families became advocates for victims' rights, ensuring that the names of their loved ones stood for something more than just a sensational headline. When Orenthal James Simpson passed away in April 2024, the reaction was as divided as it was in 1995. There were no state funerals or outpourings of universal grief. Instead, there was a somber reflection on a wasted life and a talent consumed by narcissism and violence. The headlines once again replayed the images of the white Bronco and the bloody glove. The man who had sought fame above all else had achieved a level of infamy that few in history have ever reached. He died without ever confessing, leaving the mystery of the murder weapon and the bloody clothes officially unresolved. The mystery of what exactly happened on that walkway in Brentwood remains officially unsolved in the eyes of the law despite the civil verdict. The knife used in the attacks was never found. The clothes Simpson wore that night were never recovered. Conspiracy theories continue to circulate about drug debts and hired hitmen, but the overwhelming consensus points to a crime of passion. The case remains a dark puzzle in American history, a story of how a hero fell from the greatest heights to the lowest depths. It serves as a grim reminder that behind the bright lights of celebrity darkness can hide in plain sight. As we look back on the trial of the century, we are left with more questions than answers about the nature of justice. Did the system work as intended by acquitting a man where reasonable doubt existed, or did it fail by letting a murderer walk free due to legal showmanship? The O.J. Simpson saga is a uniquely American tragedy, combining race and class and celebrity and violence into a narrative that defined a decade. It holds a mirror up to society, revealing uncomfortable truths that we are still grappling with today. The story of O.J. Simpson is the story of America at the end of the 20th century. Ultimately, the story ends where it began, with two graves in California and a nation divided. The passage of time has done little to heal the wounds inflicted by the case. The images of the trial remain etched in the collective memory of a generation. The O.J. Simpson trial was the moment when fame met infamy, when the lines between entertainment and news blurred beyond recognition. It stands as a warning about the seduction of celebrity and the devastating cost of violence. The final verdict may have been delivered in a courtroom, but the judgment of history is still being written.